Hello, and thank you for joining us today for Frost & Sullivan's latest webinar. Today's event is titled Automotive Aftermarket Transformation, 5 Growth Opportunities. My name is Anna, and I oversee Frost & Sullivan's Growth, Innovation, and Leadership Briefing. Today's presenters are Kumar, Saha, Director, Research Mobility here at Frost & Sullivan. Also joining us today from Frost & Sullivan is Anuj Monga, Global Program Manager, Research Aftermarket Mobility. And joining us is guest speaker Shiva. He's CEO of Pitstop. With that, I would now like to hand the presentation over to Kumar. Please begin.
Great. Thank you, Anna. Welcome, everyone, to our Global Automotive Aftermarket Outlook webinar. And before we jump into our presentation, we have a poll question for participants. And the question, as you can probably see on your screen, is which of the following trends you think will drive your company's growth strategy in the next 5 years? The choices are vehicle connectivity, vehicle diagnostics, vehicle prognostics, and data monetization. You can choose any of those options, and we will announce the results of the poll at the end of today's webinar. So just before we start, we'll quickly go over the agenda for today's talk. So we will start with a wrap of what happened in the year that was. So in 2018, what were some of the key trends and figures? And then look forward out to 2019 and find out what would be the potential plays for this year. Then we'll have a discussion on the 4 aftermarket trends that we believe will be the most disruptive in the next 10 years. And then the growth opportunities that those trends are going to foster. And then we'll have our guest speaker, Shiva Bhardwaj, talk a little bit about his company, Pitstop, and talk about how predictive analytics and data usage will transform the aftermarket. So looking back to 2018, it was another year of fairly steady global aftermarket growth. Revenue hovered around the 4 or 5% growth mark for 30 years in a row per tracking. Overall, if you look at the improvements in GDP, which is obviously one of the key major factors behind the growth in aftermarket, a lot of strong activity in Western economies, particularly U.S. and Canada. But what we saw was the impact of tariffs and trade wars started to weigh down, some of these economies by Q4. Some markets, such as Canada, are already heading towards a mild recession, most likely. For 2019, you're also expecting the U.S. to slow down a little bit. The other major story for 2018 was the slowdown in car sales growth. And we'll have more details on that, later on. But particularly in countries like China, car sales slowed down. In U.S., it was pretty flat. In countries like Canada, it actually dropped. So, and this is, again, a trend that we will see carry on forward. VIO growth was still fairly strong at about 4% globally. And right now, the global VIO stands at about 1.3 billion vehicles. And as I mentioned, parts revenue was strong, and we saw China and India, despite the economic weaknesses in China, we saw strong double-digit growth in 2018. But we see that growth falling a little bit in 2019, and we'll talk about that again later on. Online sales penetration was about the 4 or 5% mark. Significant trends there, and in particularly in the Western economies as well as countries like China, and which brings us to some of the key trends that we saw in 2018, past the numbers. One major trend in 2018, and this has been carrying on for some time, was the growth in SUVs and light trucks. And this was across the board. It's very strong sales, and this will present some opportunities which we'll talk about later on. The other major trend for 2018 was the pace of consolidation, particularly in Europe. You had a lot of acquisition activities happening in European markets, particularly by players entering into the market from North America. But even beyond Europe, we saw significant consolidation happening in markets like Mexico, in Brazil. For the first time in the last few years, we're seeing a lot of the fragmented market in countries like Mexico and Brazil, a lot of the fragmented players acquiring enough companies to go over the valuation of $1 billion in revenue. The other major trend was the omnichannelization of the aftermarket. And omnichannelization was not just focused on within a individual company. What we saw that traditional offline heavy participants joined forces with online participants. A great example of that is the Amazon and Monga alliance, for that matter. For instance, now you can buy a tire on Amazon and get it installed at a Monroe location in the U.S. We had the example of Walmart and Advance Auto. Again, in this case, both traditional companies joining hands to create a unified digital platform. So we have these kind of collaborations going on in the market, and the whole thrust of these collaborations is to enhance the digital experience. The other major trend, and this is kind of an offset of the trend that I just spoke about, was the expansion of e-retailers. The likes of Amazon, Amazon introduced its private label, for instance, in the market. And we're going to see more and more instances of e-retailers expanding into the independent aftermarket. They're trying to expand their B2B platforms. And one of the reasons behind that, and it's both driver as well as influencer of connectivity in workshops. So there are two elements to it. First of all, per our, some of the surveys that we do, we see an increasing incidence of installers ordering online. And it's both through internet platforms as well as internet platforms. And whenever we ask the question, most installers say that they will increase their online ordering processes. Now, what does that mean? That means that for suppliers, cataloging has to be absolutely bang on, and there's an increasing focus on creating better catalogs going forward and creating more robust catalogs. The second example of connectivity in workshops was that some of the diagnostic tools that are coming to the market will now have e-commerce capabilities built into them. So that kind of opens up another channel, another touch point with the installer, which will also be a game changer in the market. So that was 2018. So what do we see happening in 2019? We see global GDP, we see some slowdown in global GDP, which will have a continued negative impact on the aftermarket. Car sales, again, very flat. We'll probably see some a good growth coming out of countries like Brazil, potentially India, although things might be a little restrained in the first half of the year, particularly because of the upcoming elections in that region. But if you're looking at most of the Western economies, US, Canada, UK, car sales will decline, and in some cases, like Germany, it would probably stay flat. Vehicles in operation, lower growth than 2018, so we are forecasting about a 0.03% decline from 0.3% decline from 4% to 3.7%, and also parts growth kind of declining as well globally. Again, staying in the 4% mark, but if you look at some of the countries such as U.S., Canada, we see parts growth hovering around 2 to 3% mark. Online sales will continue to grow, and that will be buoyed by some of the activities again going on the developed in the emerging markets. But as far as developed economies go, it's going to slow down significantly in terms of growth. As far as the key trends are concerned, again, we'll see more instances of private labeling. Amazon will probably move beyond just the engine oil that has introduced as a private label into aftermarket products and also start to develop its B2B fleet business. So more focus on business to business. We will see continued growth in light truck and SUV sales globally. And what that would mean is that it would increase the spend per vehicle, particularly for things like tires and brakes, which are typically 20 to 30% more expensive on a light truck and SUV compared to a compact car or even a sedan. There will be, for OEMs, there will be significant opportunity to sell accessories, so you can expect some growth there as well. The impact of trade barriers obviously would be a major drag on the global economy. We still don't know what the fallout from Brexit is going to be, but if there is a no-deal Brexit, which we'll get to know by the end of this month, hopefully, the impact of that will be global, not just for the UK market. Same with the China and the US tariff battle that's been going on. Yes, we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, but it has already impacted a lot of pricing in the US market, and a lot of the inventories that were purchased in Q4 were more expensive, and some of those costs will be passed down to customers in Q1 and Q2 in 2019. So those trends will continue to impact growth. We see specific growth in digitization and vehicle services, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. Despite the drag in the economy, we see a 1 to 2% growth globally in miles traveled, which is good for the aftermarket. But a lot of the miles traveled growth will come off of the back of new mobility services such as ride-sharing or e-hailing, and that would definitely be a positive impact on miles traveled. So in this slide, we dive into a little deeper as to what would be the vehicle sales growth outlook. So if you look at the last 2 years, 2017 and 2018, it's been fairly flat. The good news has been in economies like Brazil. Brazil was in a bit of a free fall prior to 2017, but vehicle sales have grown ever since, and we see it continue to grow. On the other hand, Mexican market has been declining, but this year we expect it to grow a little bit. But on the other hand, as I mentioned, both U.S. and Canada will decline. China will be flat. India would potentially kind of remain the same as last year, but again, nowhere near the highs of 2017. Again, it's very flat throughout the year, so that doesn't bode very well for the future of the aftermarket. But of course, that will have more of a long-term impact. But it will have an immediate impact on the OES channel, particularly because you would see particular decline in maintenance services for the OES channel. So there are some immediate impact from the low vehicle sales environment that will be immediately felt by the OEMs, but less so by the aftermarket. But there's a pocket of opportunity here. This slide shows the breakdown. So we mapped the sales for the last 3 years, and we looked at the split between light trucks and cars. And if you look at the figures, pretty much light trucks grew in every country. Obviously, the growth is pretty well known in U.S. and Canada, but if you look at countries like India, if you look at countries like Brazil here, tremendous growth, 35%, 46%. Even in Germany, there was a much stronger growth, which is not a market that is known for a significant penetration of light trucks and SUVs. The other dynamic here is that India and China, the growth was not just in light trucks, but premium and luxury light truck and SUV segments, which again was going to drive the revenue per vehicle and will provide some opportunities for higher sales and parts and accessories. Last but not the least, regional revenue will grow, but not grow as strong as 2017 and 2018. The growth rate will decline in pretty much every market, including India and China, where I think for the first time in the last 3-4 years, we're going to see growth rates decline to under double digits. So last few years, we have always seen growth rates at about 10 to 12%. But this year, we are forecasting growth rates below that. The bright spot from the last few years would be Brazil and Mexico, where we see a fairly strong growth coming out in the aftermarket, again, driven by the improvements in the overall economic environment of those countries. Last but not the least, in terms of short-term trends, we see some important trends coming out of these individual markets. I've touched upon some of them. I'll just highlight a few more. If you look at U.S. and Canada, we're going to see, used vehicle sales are going to grow, and they've been growing because of the glut of vehicles that have come into the market post-2010, 2011, and those vehicles would enter their second life cycle in a lot of cases. But the important thing is a lot of these vehicles are also for the first time equipped with advanced sensors or advanced driver assistance sensors. And some of those sensors, because some of these vehicles will get into a collision or something like that, will require repair, and that will be a new opportunity in the market. For U.S. and Canada, we also see strong replacement demand coming in Q2, particularly because of the harsh winter we have had over here, and also opportunities, again, in fleet repair and trucks and SUVs. In markets such as Latin America, obviously, the overall economic factor will be there, but these countries will continue to have high average vehicle age. So there will be opportunities for repair that will continue. In Europe, particularly, again, Brexit, competition in European distribution, but another lesser known or lesser talked about trend is the growth in Asian OEMs that we have seen for the last few years. So again, that will provide opportunities for suppliers who are targeting those OEMs, and we'll see growth targeting those applications. So this is kind of a wrap-up of what we think will pan out in the market for the short term. I'll turn over to my colleague Anuj to take us through what's going to happen in the aftermarket, what would be the major trends in the aftermarket in the long term. So with this, over to you, Anuj.
Thanks, Kumar, and thanks for highlighting what is that we are going to see in the immediate future in the aftermarket. And now we'll be discussing about what lies in the far future, what are the key trends that or the strategic shifts that we are seeing in the aftermarket and how they are expected to have an impact on the aftermarket. We look at these trends in four different buckets. We look at how the vehicle is getting disrupted. The vehicles are getting more connected, they're getting more automated, there's shared mobility coming into the system, and obviously there's an electrification of the powertrain, which is disrupting the traditional vehicle itself. Secondly, we'll be discussing how there has been a disruption in the whole value chain, and this has primarily been because of the entry of some new companies, new intermediaries who come with their own business models. And thirdly, we'll be discussing how there has been a shift in the vehicle ownership and how vehicle ownership management has become an independent function in itself, how there are companies who are targeting this space. We will be discussing about that. And then lastly, we would be discussing how each of these disruptions, right from the vehicle to the ecosystem and from the ownership, how each of these disruptions is creating an opportunity of sorts with the whole data monetization and the access to data coming out of it. So we would be discussing each one of them. And to start with, if we could, yeah. So if we were to look at how the vehicles are changing, we need to look at how the vehicles are getting more connected. And when we say connected, we are talking about vehicles that have an ability to send and receive data. If we look at the global forecast for some of the connected vehicles, by 2025, there's a forecast of upwards of 70 million connected vehicles to be sold globally, with just North America alone adding more than 170 million new connected vehicles on the road by 2025. Now, this is over and above the existing vehicle park of connected cars that we have on road. And just to put things into perspective, the vehicle park in North America as of today is about 300 million vehicles. And if we are talking about adding another 170 million connected vehicles, we are looking at anywhere between 50 to 60% of the current vehicle park transitioning or moving on towards a connected vehicle system. And the opportunities that come out of it, the whole gamut of opportunities that we see from these connected vehicles that have an ability to send and receive data is tremendous. We have n number of new features that we are talking about. We have new services that have disruption potential in themselves. The likes of OEM predictive services. We are seeing a lot of OEMs already looking at that. We're talking about over-the-air updates, which we already have in some of the vehicles from Tesla, and now that even the likes of General Motors talking about it. Such over-the-air updates can completely remove the traditional vehicle service value chain out of the system, and they do definitely have far-reaching impact on how new vehicle services are going to be delivered in the future. So and obviously there are other models around the same connected vehicle system. These include advancements on the HMI systems, infotainment systems, integrated vehicle management services are just some of them. But there's a whole lot more to discuss around how connected vehicles and the applications can have an impact on the aftermarket. And when we're talking about some of these companies, when we're talking about how each of them is addressing this, we then talk about how some of the new intermediaries, how some of the new companies are disrupting this space as well, the whole traditional value chain. And as Kumar mentioned in his previous slides as well, that Amazon is a name that comes often. And the reason Amazon comes often is because the way Amazon is targeting the automotive ownership management. Amazon is not just looking at selling vehicles, and Amazon is not just looking at selling parts, either through the B2C or the B2B channel, and not just alone looking at the service management. If you look at the Amazon push now, and if you look at the push for one of the solutions that Amazon Alexa, and if you just take a simple example of probably driving a car and you run out of an engine oil, or you're potentially running out of an engine oil, Alexa has those capabilities to notify you that you need an engine oil change. Alexa has these capabilities to maybe pop up on your in-vehicle interface and mention that and offer you some deals on the Amazon platform. So there's a whole lot more that Amazon can do, and Amazon's major gain from all of this is a lot more than selling these parts and services. It has largely been seen Amazon looking into tapping into the data from these vehicles and then selling this data to different industry stakeholders, selling this data back to the industry, and that's where the major chunk of the business we see going forward in the future as well. And we will talk about how data monetization is emerging as a trend in itself in the following slides later on. But when we looked at these trends, and obviously when I talked about Amazon, we need to look at how Amazon Basics has been able to launch as a brand for private labels. Amazon Web Services is the main pillar around which all of these solutions evolve, is what we see. And going forward, we believe there are more who might follow this, and we already have the likes of eBay who've been doing this to a certain extent, but somehow Amazon has been leading the pack, with Alibaba as well doing some of these bits already in the market. When we follow up on one of these trends, when we follow up the trend of new intermediaries, new market participants entering the space, there's one more trend which Frost and Sullivan identified, and we call it as the uberization of vehicle services. This is a trend which talks about putting all the vehicle service shops on a platform and making them more accessible to the customers. What we expect from our estimates is that just in 2019 alone, almost close to 400 million worth of vehicle service jobs will be booked online via service marketplaces. And most of this is expected to come from Europe as well as the US market, but there's a lot of activity that we are seeing in the Chinese market as well. And we believe that this is one of the trends to watch out for. There's a lot happening in terms of investment, and investors like Shell and ESA have been on board on some of these platforms, and Frost & Sullivan has in fact done an extensive research on this, and we would be happy to talk more about it. So we've discussed how the vehicles have become connected, how there have been new intermediaries coming in. Another major trend that we see and definitely needs a mention is about how ADAS technology is finding its own feet in the aftermarket. Yes, we talk about automated and semi-autonomous vehicles coming into the market, their penetration increasing gradually, but from the aftermarket side, we do not anticipate any significant impact from these autonomous and semi-autonomous vehicles, at least in the next 4 to 5 years. But what we definitely see causing a potential impact on the aftermarket is the impact from ADAS-equipped vehicles. And when we talk about ADAS-equipped vehicles opportunity, we're talking about the impact or the opportunity from ADAS recalibration. We're talking about the opportunity from selling these sensors. And when I say ADAS recalibration, what I actually mean is that most of these ADAS-equipped vehicles, I mean, whenever you have a requirement for specific repair or a change of certain parts, these vehicles have a necessity to kind of have these sensors recalibrated, and we are seeing more and more of this demand coming to the aftermarket. Obviously, the dealerships are the more equipped one to deal with, but it's all about how well prepared the aftermarket is in time to address this and to tap into this opportunity. We see that, I mean, just from this ADAS recalibration business alone, we see about 15 to 20% of an uptake or an increase on the order values for repair orders in workshops. We see, but that obviously comes at a cost, and we anticipate some cost in tooling, we anticipate some cost in training of service technicians. So there's a mix of both, but there's a definite opportunity that we see, and with close to about 60 million ADAS-equipped vehicles on road in the U.S. alone, there is definitely an opportunity for the aftermarket to look at. Once we've looked at this, another shift that we see in the aftermarket or in the automotive industry per se is about how the ownership is changing and how new ownership models have come in. And from our estimates, we estimate that by 2025, almost 19 million vehicles will be under some sort of a shared mobility platform, which might include ride-hailing, which might include car rentals. But what it really means is that this new way of vehicle ownership will translate into new ways of servicing these vehicles. So this necessitates new service models around targeting these accounts, new service models around servicing these accounts, and that's where, again, the preparedness of the aftermarket would be checked. And we're already seeing a lot of these companies, the likes of Uber, who are working very closely with some tire suppliers in the U.S., or working with the likes of Advance Auto and AutoZone in the U.S. To manage their vehicle service requirements. So we've seen some bit of collaborations already, and it's only a matter of time when these collaborations grow, and they're not very region specific, but they become more global. So there's much bigger opportunity to tap when there are such global collaborations that come into place. When we looked at, and obviously, I mean, we saw how the vehicles are changing. They became connected. There's integration of autonomous technologies into the vehicles. We looked at the engagement and the involvement of intermediaries. All of this eventually brings us to a bigger picture. It brings us to discuss what is essentially the theme of our presentation as well, and that's about how data from these vehicles is to be monetized. And while we'll discuss more on that in the following slides, what really stands out is that the vehicle today generates n number of data points. And each of these customers that you could potentially think of have their own data requirements. For example, if case in point, I mean, University of Michigan ran a project sometime back wherein they tried to gather information from the wipers of vehicles just to try and understand the possibility of flooding in some of the regions around the university. That was a project on a small scale, but what it really highlights is that data access and gathering data is not limited to sophisticated parts like the electricals or the electronic parts, but it has actually started to be seen from more mechanical parts, which includes the shock absorbers. These include the windshield wipers, and there are n number of other examples to fall back on as well. So the access of data and getting data is no more a challenge. It's about how you manage that data now, and that's where we would see as well. And when we have one of our next speakers to discuss on, and before I pass it on to him, I would just want to lay some ground about it, that data monetization today is not limited to specific companies. I mean, there are use cases for almost any possible industry participant that you want to talk about today, be it a fleet which needs data on how the fleets are moving, be it the infrastructure management companies who invest into managing the infrastructure for electric vehicles, be it the government bodies who need to manage their own fleet, who need to manage their own budgets. So there are data monetization opportunities with possibly all types of different customers in the market today. And to talk more about it, to tell us more as to how that can be done and how that is already being done, I would like to pass the presentation on to my co-presenter, Shiva from Pitstop, who would take us through his company's value proposition and how they are delivering this solution in the market. So over to you, Shiva.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Just get, I guess, take control of the screens. All right, great. So I guess I'll start and give a little bit of a background on myself and the company and what we're building, and then I can get right into discussing the details of how we've leveraged data from connected vehicles at scale and from the supply chain by taking various data silos and applying advanced machine learning techniques, as well as analytics, statistical analytics, to drive insights that ultimately predict component failures, helps with just-in-time parts management, with product development, and a number of other aspects, such as supporting the insurance and fleet industries with their business objectives through data. And I guess my background is I come from the tech industry, working at companies like NVIDIA and BlackBerry, building advanced systems that help power their systems, such as the Tegra chipset, which powers Tesla's infotainment unit, and the new that chipset was actually instrumental to the autonomous drive platforms that are deployed by NVIDIA, and then with BlackBerry at QNX. And so seeing how quickly tech companies iterate on their products by developing software, and then having a background also in the automotive industry in the aftermarket space through my father's repair centers, I've noticed that the technologies that are being embedded in vehicles don't actually get pushed down to the aftermarket fast enough, and so you have this huge gap of advanced technologies but not advanced diagnostics and feedback coming from the market, coming from the vehicles, to help the supply chain make decisions more efficiently. And this will ultimately cause disruptors like the Amazons and Googles and these companies to come in and really change the course of how we understand automotive, the aftermarket, and even OEM development into the future. So I guess I would start with just talking about how complicated vehicles have become over the past years. So the average luxury vehicle has in the range of 100 million lines of code, with well over 3,000 parts in it. If you look at Facebook's code base, it's about 100 million lines of code. So it's on one vehicle on the road is on par with Facebook's code base, but a lot of it is driven with inefficiencies in which multiple suppliers develop similar software modules that are not being cross-leveraged across the vehicle, and so you have a lot of complications to the software, electronics, and the ultimate control system of the car. And so on top of this, if you just look at our mobility as a global, like in the globe, we have well over 1 billion cars on the road, with over 70 million cars coming out every single year, and this is growing. And really, I guess when Henry Ford really initiated the assembly line, the ambition was to enable mobility for the people and allow them to access anywhere in the U.S. or anywhere in the globe. And so the business model at the time was sell as many of these vehicles as possible. And now I think we've come to the point where that same business model is actually restricting the initial intent, which was mobility. And so we have all these disruptive models emerging, and my co-presenters mentioned a number of them prior to my presentation. And so where I'm going to focus is if you look at the major impact of not analyzing data, one of the biggest impacts sits within recalls and warranty claims, which sits in the tens of billions of dollars every single year. And it's as simple as vehicles on the road today are not being analyzed in near real time to then reduce how certain problems will then escalate across the vehicle car park. So if you're able to identify issues as early as possible in the life cycle, it evidently will drive a lot of value and reduce these recall costs. And so changing the paradigm of how data comes back from the dealer networks, from vehicles directly, from the supply chain, into the decision-making cycles, imperative to making better vehicles and more safer vehicles, and really fitting into this autonomous future that everyone's talking about. So the problem, though, today, and the reason why prediction and analytics has not gained the impact it should have in the aftermarket, in the automotive supply chain, is because of how transactional the relationships are across each member of the ecosystem. And so, for example, if a vehicle owner is driving down the road and something happens to that car, they enter a repair facility. Usually when it's a drivability issue, lots of people ignore their engine lights if it doesn't cause them any breakdowns or any severe issues. So once they decide to then go to a repair facility, that repair facility is then trying to reassemble what happened on the road, or re-simulate that in the back of the shop so the technician can catch the specific symptom. And then once they do that, they then order the component or the part, and the part supplier is hoping that the technician is a good technician and ordered the correct part, but they have no idea why that part was ordered. And then you go all the way back up to the supply chain, to the actual manufacturer and warehouse distributors, who don't know why in January and February in Canada their fuel pumps sold in higher volumes this year than last year, because there's no real-time data to really drive those insights. And so the problem is that the industry is very transactional in nature, and what it needs to come to is more of a data shared model where information that's not that's generally anonymized, not personalized. So general information that talks about how vehicles are being maintained, how they are failing, how parts are being supplied, will support everyone in the supply chain, all the way down to the driver, who will understand why his component is failing and why it's important to get service, all the way up to the supplier saying, this is in January, the reason my fuel pumps were failing more and I sold more parts was because the car park age has grown. So the car park age for these fuel pumps has grown in the amount of years that they've been on the road, and the humidity was higher in this month and such. And as a result, now I realize why I had to stock more inventory. So this value, though, of collecting information from the vehicle and from each person in the supply chain, each company or each organization, is that after you clean the data and set up the architecture, you're able to apply predictive algorithms on top of this data set to help improve part quality, improve vehicle maintenance, reduce fleet downtime, reduce recalls, drive better customer experience, and there are hugely, it's like a win-win implementation for everybody in the ecosystem, and there's nothing to lose. And as a result, we're seeing a lot of great value with the platform that we've built with Pitstop, which really sits as a data hub in the center of dealer groups and service networks, with fleet telematics operators and companies, as well as OEM telematics, including OnStar alongside a few others, and then the supply chain of parts distributors, manufacturers, and suppliers. And so when we are able to bring this together, we can do a lot of very valuable things, and I'll get into a few of those examples in just a second. But I guess the two biggest impacts for suppliers really sits in enabling customer-centered development. So based on what's happening right now on the road, we are going to iterate our strategy based on what's happening with our cars, rather than we believe, based on a market study that happened 3 years ago or last year, that we should move into this direction. So it's taking really that tech, what the tech industry does, and taking that approach and applying it to this industry. And then the second most impactful thing to driving disruption is really looking at implementing software in a big data manner, so you can apply over-the-air updates, do this predictive analytics, and ultimately reduce those recalls and the costs associated with unsafe cars on the road. And so I'm not sure if this would work, but I guess if anyone's interested, I was going to showcase a quick demonstration. You could just email me at shiva@pitstopconnect.com, and we can go through that as needed. But I'll show you some use cases of what the platform's able to do. So as we've analyzed tens of thousands of cars through our system, we've been able to identify a number of failures. This use case specifically was that in 2017, we had a particular make, model, year on the system, and our algorithms was able to pick up on an issue with the transmission control module. And what we noticed was that these vehicles were shifting in a delayed fashion. And it was about 15% of the vehicles that we had on our system of this make, model, year that were showing these signs. And so we put a report together, and we were able to issue it to NHTSA and that OEM. And about 9 months after that recall was released to update the software on this control module. Had that vehicle actually issued the recall at the time of our detection or nearly after that, the cost savings on the overall recall issuance would have been in the range of $30 to $50 million. So the impact is significant in getting information early on and being able to trust that information in that analytics. So that's one example that I thought would be valuable to share, and we have many of these types of examples. But the way we're able to achieve that and get to this is when you take the time series information coming from the vehicle, so the various sensors of the 300 to 500 sensors running on a combustion engine or any vehicle for that matter, and you're able to then take the events, the failure events, such as engine lights coming onto the vehicle, so repair facilities changing parts and stating what the price is of those parts, or suppliers getting warranty-issued parts returned and collecting that data set. So when you bring those two data sets from the car and then from humans that have logged certain events together, you're able to really drive predictions. And these predictions allow you to say there's a 90% chance that this transmission control module fault will occur on your vehicle as a result of comparing your vehicle's data to 5,000 other cars on the road that have had this issue. And so that's the power of running analysis on data at scale across various vehicle make, model, years, and analyzing various parts across the ecosystem. And then ultimately the benefits is understanding the failure rates of these components all the way down to regional levels, being able to understand how to stock parts in the aftermarket, which is very much a challenge, early detection of recalls and warranty. There's also a number of fraud-related cases that emerge, but when you have data coming from the vehicle and then that vehicle goes in for a component replacement and it's evident that the component was operating fine, you're able to detect fraud early on in the life cycle. And it all comes from agnostic cloud-based analytics. So agnostic to any hardware, whether it's OEM connected telematics or aftermarket connected telematics, being agnostic to the data source, but being able to provide a very coherent manner of cleaning the data, setting up the architecture to then run analytics on top of it is really the value that we're bringing to the market with our various customers. And so this kind of shows where a company like ours fits into the ecosystem. So there's a number of data platforms that do exist. They all target various niches of the value chain for the connected car. And so we're an aggregator of a lot of raw data coming from telematics and then event-based data coming from the industry. And we put that together and curate insights that then these companies are able to consume to make better, more efficient decisions. And then companies outside of the people who provide us data can also benefit from this information, including insurance companies, including parts distributors and suppliers, and there's a number of others that we work with. And so the way we've designed our platform is to be very open and flexible, where we have APIs that are accessed, very secured APIs that are able to ingest information and then output insights. There's front-end dashboards that are customized as per customer needs, as well as mobile applications as required. And the idea at the end of the day is to improve the trust and transparency in the industry by leveraging real-time data. And so we believe that we're a cooperative data platform to the other data platforms that exist in driving this unique value out of prognostics to the existing ecosystems out there. We look at the connected car space a lot like the internet in the early days. That's where I feel it is today, where we had a lot of computers out in the market without the connectivity of the internet in the early 90s, and the value was you could play games and use Microsoft Excel and Word and those type of features, but as soon as you had connectivity, it enabled services like Amazon and Google and Facebook. And so similarly with the connected vehicle, as these nodes who are mostly unconnected on the road today get more and more connected and are a part of kind of a bigger shared ecosystem, the value of those applications that will sit on this stack will be much different than what you can imagine exists today. And it's not something you're going to be able to necessarily predict exactly how it's going to unfold, but you know that the value will be significant as long as you're focused on the most important piece, which is how to make use of the data and monetize the data and then drive impactful decision making. And so that's kind of where we sit in that value chain. And so far, I guess just on our traction, we've captured data from well over 160,000 vehicles with millions of miles of driving data from vehicles. We have about 5 proprietary algorithms that are in the patent process right now, and our major partnerships include global service networks, dealer networks where we get repair service data as well as access to that connected vehicle data through those vehicles, and then we're working with large fleet telematics organizations to gain access to their data sets as well to run this analytics. And so we're really in the business of taking unstructured data, things that sit as a mess, putting it through the process we've developed with our amazing team of data scientists and computer scientists, and then providing insights that is valuable so that businesses can go on and make impactful decisions and beat their competitors at the punch. And that's pretty much what we do at Pitstop and the value prop.
Thank you, Shiva. So at this time, before we start our question and answer session, I'm going to go over the results of the poll question. So we asked our audience which of the following trends will drive your company's growth strategy in the next 5 years. And we have 59% indicate the vehicle connectivity, 27% indicate the data monetization, 9% vehicle diagnostics, and lastly 4% was the vehicle prognostics. So those are the results. Thanks again for taking the time to select a answer. And so just a couple of next steps and we'll go straight into our question and answer session. So if you'd like more information on joining our Leadership Council, we encourage you to reach out to us via our GoFrost line at 1-877-463-7678, or you can send us an email to myfrost@frost.com. So we're going to go ahead and start our question and answer session at this point. Our first question that we have, what is the assumption to connected vehicles in your perspective? I mean, just infotainment is considered a connected car, or is it important to consider other features?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Anna. I can take that. So, yeah, I think we need to kind of think beyond the connected car, beyond the infotainment system. So connected car is basically, in our analysis, anything that is able to send and receive data. So a lot of connected cars, or most of the cars that are being sold currently have some level of connectivity embedded in them. So it's not just the infotainment system, but it's the ability to send and receive data, which is pretty much in most advanced economies. Almost 100% of cars that are sold these days have that level of embedded connectivity. Now, whether a vehicle owner chooses to actively deploy those connected car solutions is another matter altogether. but technically you're able to send and receive data to those cars. So that is kind of our definition of connected vehicles in our forecast.
Thank you, Kumar. And just as a quick reminder to those that have joined us in the middle of the presentation and now as well, the on-demand recording will be available shortly after we have finished today's session. So I don't see that we have any more questions at this time, so I'm going to end the webinar here. Once again, we'd like to thank you for joining us today, and we also like to thank Shiva, CEO of Pitstop, for joining us. I want to thank everyone again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.